The COVID-19 pandemic transformed New York in ways few could have imagined. The metropolis that had always been synonymous with hustle, diversity, and infinite opportunities underwent a painful metamorphosis. When the virus hit the city in March 2020, New York became the global epicenter of the crisis, recording alarming numbers of cases and deaths. The streets of Times Square, normally filled with tourists and flashing lights, became deserted. The subway, which transported millions daily, ran with empty cars. It was as if the city had entered suspended animation, awaiting an uncertain future. The first months were devastating. Overflowing hospitals, improvised refrigerators serving as morgues, ambulance sirens echoing incessantly through the avenues. New York lost more than 30,000 lives in the first months of the pandemic. Small businesses that had survived previous economic crises closed their doors, many forever. Iconic restaurants, decades-old shops, Broadway theaters, all silenced at once. Governor Andrew Cuomo became a central figure, holding daily press conferences that were watched by millions of frightened New Yorkers seeking guidance amid the chaos. But resilience has always been part of New York's DNA. The city that survived September 11th, the 2008 financial crisis, and Hurricane Sandy was not ready to surrender. When restrictions began to be relaxed in the summer of 2020, many expected a quick recovery. After all, this was New York, the city that never sleeps, the financial center of the world, the place where dreams come true. However, what emerged was a different city, transformed not only by disease but by the profound changes that the pandemic accelerated. Remote work, which had previously been a privilege for few, became the norm for millions. Technology and finance companies realized their employees could be productive from home, eliminating the need for expensive offices in Manhattan. This change had a devastating cascading effect. Without workers filling trains and buses during rush hour, without crowds looking for quick lunch, coffee, or happy hour after work, the entire economy that revolved around the physical presence of workers began to crumble. Street vendors, small cafes, laundromats, restaurants, all felt the impact immediately. The most affected commercial neighborhoods were those that depended on the constant flow of office workers. Manhattan's financial district, which had already lost part of its vitality after September 11th, saw its streets become even emptier. Iconic commercial buildings began to have historically low occupancy rates. Commercial real estate owners began offering months of free rent, but still struggled to find tenants. The question that echoed was, who needs an office when you can work from home? The exodus began quietly, but its numbers were alarming. New York's real estate market, traditionally one of the most expensive and competitive in the world, experienced something unprecedented: falling prices and excess supply. Apartments that would have been rented in a matter of days sat empty for months. Desperate landlords lowered prices, offered incentives, but the demand simply wasn't there. Neighborhoods like Greenwich Village, Soho, and Upper East Side, always in demand, saw "for rent" signs multiply. For some New Yorkers who stayed, it was an opportunity to finally afford to live in previously inaccessible neighborhoods. For landlords and the city, it meant billions in lost revenue. The retail crisis was equally brutal. The famous Fifth Avenue, where luxury brands competed for storefronts and paid some of the world's highest rents, saw numerous stores close. It wasn't just small boutiques that suffered. Retail giants like Macy's, Lord & Taylor, and Century 21 also faced extreme difficulties or closed completely. Commerce had migrated even more online during the pandemic, and consumers discovered they didn't need to physically go to stores. The shopping experience that New York offered, the glamour, the variety, the energy of commercial streets, lost part of its appeal when compared to the convenience of shopping from the couch. New York's restaurants, which had always been an essential part of the city's cultural identity, were devastated. The city had more than 25,000 food establishments before the pandemic, employing hundreds of thousands of people. When they were forced to close or operate only with delivery and takeout, most didn't have financial reserves to survive. Even with government assistance programs, thousands closed permanently. Iconic places where generations of New Yorkers had celebrated, cried, and fallen in love simply disappeared. The Gotham Bar and Grill, open since 1984, closed. The 21 Club, a landmark since Prohibition, shut down. Each closure was a small death for the city's soul. The gradual reopening brought new challenges. Restaurants could operate, but with reduced capacity, costly safety protocols, and still hesitant consumers. Many establishments invested in outdoor dining structures, transforming sidewalks and even entire streets into outdoor dining areas. The city's Open Streets program allowed restaurants to expand into urban space, creating a new aesthetic: small wooden huts, heaters, creative decorations. It was charming and necessary, but also revealed how much things had changed. Winter made these solutions less viable, and many owners wondered how much longer they could hold on. The tourism sector, vital to New York, collapsed. The city used to receive more than 60 million visitors annually, generating about $70 billion in spending. Hotels, tourist attractions, Broadway theaters, museums, all depended on this constant flow. With closed borders, canceled flights, and widespread fear, tourists simply stopped coming. Hotels in Manhattan reported occupancy rates below 50%, something unimaginable in pre-pandemic years. Some were temporarily converted into homeless shelters or quarantine facilities. The Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all experienced silence where there had once been crowds. Broadway, the theatrical heart of the world, went dark for a record time. All productions were suspended in March 2020, and theaters remained closed for more than a year, the longest interruption in Broadway's history. When they finally reopened in September 2021, it was with strict vaccination and mask protocols. Some productions managed to return, but many didn't survive the hiatus. Actors, dancers, musicians, technicians, and all the professionals who make theatrical magic happen faced prolonged unemployment. For an industry that employs tens of thousands and attracts millions of spectators, the impact was devastating. New York's public transportation, especially the subway, faced an existential crisis. The system, already struggling with aging infrastructure problems, lost more than 90% of its passengers at the height of the pandemic. Even with reopening, many people continued avoiding public transportation for fear of contagion. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority, MTA, faced budget deficits of billions of dollars. Without fare revenue and with increased cleaning and disinfection costs, the system needed massive federal aid to survive. The experience of riding the subway changed, less crowded, but also more unpredictable, with an increase in homeless people and safety issues. The crime issue became central in the debate about New York's recovery. During the pandemic and in the following months, the city saw concerning increases in certain types of crime. Shootings increased significantly in 2020 and 2021 compared to previous years. Hate crimes, especially against Asian Americans, skyrocketed. Violent incidents in the subway gained national headlines. Although overall crime statistics were still below the peaks of the 1980s and 1990s, the perception of insecurity grew. For a city trying to win back residents and visitors, this narrative was especially damaging. Mayor Bill de Blasio, who led the city during most of the pandemic, faced intense criticism. Some thought he had been slow to react initially. Others criticized reopening decisions. The management of the 2020 protests after George Floyd's death, which included tensions between protesters and police, further complicated his leadership. When he left office in December 2021, the city was at a moment of profound uncertainty about its future. The election of Eric Adams, a former police captain who promised to make the city safe again and bring back its vitality, reflected New Yorkers' desire for change and recovery. Mental health became a growing concern. The collective trauma of living at the pandemic's epicenter, prolonged isolation, economic uncertainty, loss of loved ones, all of this took its psychological toll. Mental health services reported dramatic increases in demand. The city's homeless population, already significant before the pandemic, grew even more. Many people lost their homes due to unemployment and couldn't recover. Shelters became overcrowded, and the number of people living on the streets increased visibly. For a city trying to reinvent itself, the growing visibility of poverty and human suffering was a painful reminder of deep inequalities. New York's public schools, which serve more than 1 million students, faced monumental challenges. The largest school system in the country had to navigate between remote, hybrid, and in-person learning while dealing with issues of digital equity, health safety, and learning loss. Many students, especially from low-income communities, didn't have adequate internet access or devices. Remote learning revealed and widened existing disparities. Teachers struggled to engage students through screens, and working parents tried to balance work with supervising their children's education. The long-term effects of this educational disruption are still being measured, but experts warn of lasting impacts on the academic and socio-emotional development of an entire generation. New York's artistic and cultural community, always vibrant, was particularly hit. Art galleries closed, performances were canceled, musicians had no stages. The city that had always been a magnet for creatives from around the world suddenly seemed less attractive. Without the energy of nightlife, without gallery openings, without impromptu shows in small clubs, part of the magic that made New York special disappeared. Many artists, already living on the financial edge, were forced to leave the city or change careers. The question persisted: could New York still be the cultural center of the world if it couldn't sustain its artists? Inequality, always present in New York, became more visible and acute. While technology and finance professionals could work remotely from comfortable apartments, essential workers, delivery people, store clerks, healthcare workers, transportation employees continued risking themselves daily. Many of these workers lived in neighborhoods like Queens, the Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn, where infection and mortality rates were significantly higher. The pandemic not only exposed these inequalities, but widened them. The most vulnerable suffered disproportionately, while the most privileged could, in many cases, protect themselves and even benefit from certain changes. New York's job market underwent profound transformations. Entire sectors drastically shrank: hospitality, physical retail, live entertainment, while others grew, especially technology and e-commerce. But these new jobs didn't always absorb displaced workers. A 50-year-old waitress who had worked decades in restaurants couldn't easily become a software developer. Retraining programs were launched, but the scale of the challenge was immense. The city's unemployment rate, which was historically low before the pandemic, shot up to levels not seen since the Great Depression and took years to begin normalizing. The issue of empty offices became one of the most visible symbols of the new reality. Manhattan had more than 400 million square feet of office space, much of it now underutilized. Large corporations like J.P. Morgan Chase, Google, and Meta initially encouraged remote work, then adopted hybrid models, but few required full return to the office. This created an existential dilemma for building owners and for the city, which depended on taxes from these properties. Some suggested converting offices into residences, but the process is complex, expensive, and regulatorily challenging. Manhattan's landscape, with its iconic skyscrapers, remained physically intact, but its purpose was being questioned. The fiscal effects on the city were severe. New York lost billions in tax revenues, from sales taxes, commercial property taxes, business income taxes, and the municipal income tax, which depended on high-income workers who had left the city. The municipal budget faced enormous deficits. Public services were cut, infrastructure investments postponed, public employees laid off. The city that already struggled with aging infrastructure problems, subway, bridges, tunnels, water systems, had even fewer resources to address them. It was a vicious cycle. Fewer services made the city less attractive, which led more people and businesses to leave. Some voices argued that the exodus was permanent, that the pandemic had accelerated an irreversible shift in how we work and live. Why pay astronomical rents in New York when you can have a bigger house in Austin, Miami, or Denver with the same salary? Why endure harsh winters, crowded subways, and crime when you can have year-round sunshine and drive your own car? These questions echoed in opinion pieces, bar conversations, and corporate planning meetings. Some large companies announced headquarters moves to states with lower taxes, a symbolic and practical blow to New York. But others maintained faith in the city's unparalleled resilience. New York had been declared dead before, after the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, after September 11th, after the 2008 financial crisis, and always came back stronger. The city had unique assets: An unparalleled concentration of talent, capital, and creativity, unmatched cultural infrastructure, diversity that enriches every aspect of life, intangible energy that only New York possesses. No Zoom meeting could replicate casual encounters in West Village cafes. No secondary city could offer the same density of opportunities. Broadway's reopening in 2021 was laden with symbolism. It was a sign that New York was fighting to come back. The first nights were emotional, performers and audience celebrating not just theater, but collective survival. Productions like Hamilton, The Lion King, and Wicked returned to the stage. New musicals were launched, but numbers were still below pre-pandemic levels, with tourists slower to return and New Yorkers rethinking entertainment habits. The theater industry recognized it would need to adapt. More affordable tickets, more diverse content, perhaps hybrid formats with streaming, to thrive in the new environment. The tech sector emerged as a possible renewal force for New York. Previously seen mainly as a financial capital, the city had been cultivating a growing tech ecosystem. The pandemic accelerated digital adoption across all sectors, and New York had talent, investors, and markets to compete with Silicon Valley. Companies like Etsy, MongoDB, and Datadog maintained headquarters in New York. Startups in fintech, health tech, and e-commerce thrived. Some voices argued that New York could reinvent itself as a global tech hub, combining its financial expertise with tech innovation. But this would require investment in STEM education, startup-friendly policies, and retention of young talent, considering cheaper alternatives. The outer boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, offered reasons for optimism. While Manhattan struggled, many of these neighborhoods showed more resilience. Strong local communities, more affordable spaces, rich cultural diversity, these areas were attracting new residents, including some leaving Manhattan. Neighborhoods like Astoria, Williamsburg, Park Slope, and Flushing saw growth. New restaurants, shops, and creative spaces opened. For some observers, this represented a more balanced New York, less Manhattan-centric, more truly representative of the city's diversity. The environmental and green infrastructure issue gained new urgency. The pandemic had shown the importance of open spaces and clean air. New York launched initiatives to expand parks, create more bike lanes, pedestrianize streets, and improve air quality. The Open Streets program, initially a pandemic response, became permanent in some areas. There was recognition that the city needed to be greener, more sustainable, more livable to compete in the 21st century. Projects like Hudson Yards and the redevelopment of Governor's Island showed visions of a different urban future. Higher education, another economic pillar of New York, faced its own challenges. Universities like NYU and Columbia moved to remote, then hybrid teaching. International students, an important revenue source, faced visa barriers and travel hesitation. The traditional university experience, campus life, social interaction, networking, was fundamentally altered. Many students questioned the value of paying $50,000 a year in tuition to attend Zoom classes from their dorm room. Universities had to rethink not just how they teach, but what they offer. At the same time, these institutions were essential for the city's recovery, generating research, innovation, and feeding the future workforce. Nightlife, so essential to New York's identity, was slow to recover. Bars and clubs operated with restrictions, then without them, but patrons were more cautious. The scene that made New York exciting, intimate shows, dive bars, dance clubs running until dawn, had been hard hit. Many establishments closed permanently. Those that survived struggled with higher costs and reduced clientele. For young professionals, the promise of vibrant social life had always been part of New York's appeal. If that no longer existed, or existed in diminished form, why choose New York? The government's role became central in the debate about the future. What could the city and state do to facilitate recovery? Tax incentives for businesses, infrastructure investment, more affordable housing programs, public safety improvement, support for small businesses. Each approach had advocates and critics. Governor Kathy Hochul, who took office after Cuomo's resignation in 2021, and Mayor Eric Adams faced the Herculean task of managing recovery with limited resources and sky-high expectations. Political decisions made during this period would shape New York for decades. The narrative about New York became a battle. Critics pointed to empty buildings, rising crime, population exodus, and budget deficits as evidence of irreversible decline. Defenders highlighted historical resilience, unique assets, signs of recovery, and the city's incomparable identity. National media often focused on negative stories, feeding a perception that New York was dead. This narrative had real consequences. It affected business decisions about where to establish offices, individual choices about where to live, property investments. Proud New Yorkers fought against this narrative but recognized that real changes were necessary. Recovery was happening, but it was uneven and incomplete. Some sectors came back more quickly. Finance, for example, showed resilience. Others remained deeply affected. Some parts of the city regained vitality, while others seemed ghostly. It wouldn't be a simple return to the 2019 status quo. New York was transforming into something new. The question was, would this new version be better, worse, or simply different? Would it be a more inclusive, sustainable, and livable city? Or a diminished version of its former greatness? The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. New York's next era would be defined by how it responded to the unprecedented challenges it faced.